Today, we're talking with Kenning Associates about how to build trust on virtual teams. So whether your team is fully in person, virtual, or hybrid, a trust-driven workplace is really critical to your team's success. So today, I'm super excited to be diving into this topic and hearing from Kenning Associates with some examples of how they've helped leading businesses to drive stronger virtual team cultures. So I want to start off by introducing our speakers today. Okay, let me check this. 1 second. Great. I'm going to go ahead and start off by introducing our speaker. We're really honored to have Daryl Ogden joining us today. Daryl is a senior client counselor, advisor, and coach at Kenning Associates. He works closely with executive leadership and top teams to develop organization strategy and culture, vertical alignment, and leadership capacity. He serves Fortune 500 companies, innovative high-tech companies, leading gaming studios, as well as premier professional services firms. So welcome, Daryl. So happy to have you here today.
Hi, Melissa. Great to be here and looking forward to diving into this topic shortly.
Great, thank you. And again, I'm Melissa Perry, and I'm the Senior Marketing Manager here at Cooleaf, along with my teammate Ariam, who you will see occasionally popping up in the chat. I'm going to be moderating this webinar and sharing some resources as we go along. So here's a brief agenda for today. I'll start by sharing a bit of context around the current state of remote work, some background info on Cooleaf, and then we'll jump into Daryl's workshop. And also be sure to stick around for the end, where we will be sharing that SHRM activity code. This webinar is eligible for 1 PDC towards SHRM recertification, and we'll also share a free resource for virtual team holiday planning. And again, if you have any questions, drop them in the Q&A box at the bottom for the end. So before we dive in, I'd like to start off by taking a deeper look at where we are now. Now we are 3 years into navigating this new world of work, and things have really shifted a lot. Many people want to continue working from home at least some of the time. 56% of full-time workers say that their jobs can be done from home, and 70% of employees ages 18 to 24 would consider a new job if forced to work full-time at the office. So now we have people who are graduating from college and entering the workforce, and they've never once worked fully in person, and that's really impacting the way that we all reflect on our work culture. And while most people want to work from home in at least some capacity, there's still a lot of challenges around that. A recent poll that actually just came out this September revealed that more than half of Gen Z new hires believe remote work is hampering their ability to build connection. And 55% of those new hires think that this impact to office culture is hurting their careers. So where does this leave people leaders and team managers? And how can we take steps to avoid proximity bias, make sure that our remote team members feel seen and included? And most importantly, how can we build a culture of trust on our remote teams? So I'm actually a remote worker myself. And this year I was lucky enough to have the opportunity to travel and work remotely. So Cooleaf, where I work, is based in Atlanta, but right now I'm actually working from Panama. And earlier this year, I also started managing a remote team for the first time here at Cooleaf. And so one of the things that I think has really helped us is using technology in a way that reinforces connection rather than making people feel more distance from one another. At Cooleaf, one of the things that our platform does is create these virtual experiences to break down barriers between people. So instead of just sharing like a fun fact at the beginning of your meeting, you now have a tool to build a virtual wall of these stories that you can reference that your people are sharing. and you can get to know people on other teams a lot better as well. So at Cooleaf, we've done a lot of these challenges. We've done photography challenges to share favorite hobbies, team spirit challenges to reflect on fun work memories. And all of this just really helps people to connect more and helps you understand where your peers are coming from. It's also really beneficial for new team members who are trying to get more involved in the culture. And I really think that by reinforcing these connections in whatever way you do that is really helpful for just fostering trust on your team. The other thing that I wanted to share that's been helpful and that we've seen to be pretty critical for building trust on remote teams is just employee recognition. According to SHRM research, nearly 90% of employees who received recognition from their bosses in the past month indicated higher levels of trust in that boss. So with our customers, we've seen this to be extremely effective. So as an example, if you're working independently on a project for a long time and you finally complete that project and no one acknowledges you at all for that hard work, you're going to question why were you assigned that project in the first place? And you might start to lose some of the trust that you feel for your manager and your team. So when you're working remotely, it's really not at all uncommon for these accomplishments to be overlooked or just kind of lost in the shuffle. So a thoughtful culture of recognition can really help to foster that trust, even when you're working remotely. And so by giving managers access to an app such as Cooleaf, where they can celebrate their team members and team members can spotlight one another, it sends a really powerful message to your whole team. So those are just a few examples of how Cooleaf can help teams that are trying to balance these culture challenges. And for those of you on this webinar who aren't familiar with Cooleaf, Cooleaf is an engagement and recognition platform that helps you to celebrate and reward your people. And we've had the opportunity to work with a lot of really great companies like Shipt, SalesLoft, Kids2, and many more to help them build better cultures. But now I'm going to go ahead and turn things over to Daryl to dive into those 4 leadership strategies to build trust.
Thanks, Melissa. And it's great to be here again today and to partner with Cooleaf. And as I think everybody sees from that introduction to Cooleaf, if you didn't know the organization, you guys are in the virtual trust business in a really significant way. And so I think that today's topic ties in and aligns so well with what Cooleaf is all about. And in a way, you're setting a kind of a best practice example for all of us about what building trust in a virtual environment looks like. So it's great to be here today and really appreciate everybody joining in and look forward to an interactive and hopefully fun conversation today. So let's shift over to the Kenning presentation, which I think builds nicely on what Melissa has just offered us as a starting point. And what we're going to do today is, in this presentation, we're going to focus on 3 kind of main topics. We're going to build off of the really nice context that Melissa set up for us with the great recent data about what trends look like in terms of virtual and hybrid work, and especially for the Gen Z generation. But we're moving out of being in a full-bore pandemic crisis mode that in some sense accelerated and precipitated the move towards virtual work in North America and all around the globe, really. And so we want to talk about this new moment that we probably have already entered something like 6 months ago or so, which is a post-pandemic mode. We want to really, though, situate that moment in a way that ties in with why trust is so important, even more important in a way in virtual and hybrid environments than it is in more traditional in the office environments. And then we're going to tie our thoughts about trust and our beliefs about trust to 4 specific strategies that we think we have tested and that we believe in, and that I think that we've seen our clients use with a lot of efficacy. So where are we now? So a good deal of what we're going to talk about today, kind of best practices in building trust in virtual environments, is informed by some bellwether sectors that we serve, the high-tech sector, the gaming sector, as well as the professional services sectors. And so many of the approaches and the strategies that we use are going to be drawn from those sectors. And so what are we seeing at Kenny & Associates and our client base right now? So I think that we've all experienced and seen that, since March of 2020 or so, many organizations, maybe most organizations that didn't have a direct need to serve customers in person, moved to a virtual settings, to the degree that was possible. And fortunately, the technology and the infrastructure had caught up to a degree that permitted that. I don't know what we would have done 20, 25 years ago when we didn't have Zoom or Teams or Google Meet, for instance, but fortunately we did. And so we were able to make that transition. And more recently, though, and I would say probably, really beginning in 2022, and this trend has accelerated, I think that we've seen a lot of, I will call them more traditional companies, make a push for a return to the office. And that was for a variety of reasons that we saw and experienced that push. But, if I were going to, put a bottom line on it, I would describe that as being driven by concerns about changing culture, and it may be a deterioration or a perception of a deterioration of cohesion on teams and also performance to some degree. But I think in September of 2022, where we're landing, and what I think the norm is that most of the organizations that we serve are operating now in a hybrid model of one sort or another. Now, that's our hypothesis and that's our experience, which certainly doesn't cover the whole of the United States or North American economy, and certainly not the global economy. So we're curious, and we'd like you to weigh in and help us either confirm our hypothesis or complicate it potentially. So Melissa's just posted a work environment poll, and what we would love to know and have everybody that's participating today respond to is what number of days per week the average employee in your workplace currently spends in the office. How many days per week? 0, 1 to 2, 3 to 4, or 5, or God forbid, more than 5. So let's just take a few minutes, if you would, to respond to the poll, and let's take a look at the results together.
We have about 72% of participation, 74.
All right, let's get to 100, guys. Let's make it happen.
Okay, I'm going to go ahead and end the poll.
Okay, great. Thanks, Melissa. And Melissa, you'll post those results. So our results show us that 33% of your workplaces are essentially virtual, it seems, because 0 days per week for the average employee. 46% are 1 to 2 days per week, 17% 3 to 4 days, and 4%, 5 days or more. Hopefully it's only 5 days. But I think that in a really powerful way, this poll confirms our hypothesis that 63% of today's participants are working in environments that are mostly hybrid. And then, of course, we've got 33% working, totally virtually. And that includes, by the way, my organization, Kenny & Associates. We are a virtual organization. We've got our partners and associates dotted around North America, as well as some in Europe as well. And so it seems like this this presentation today and this conversation is extremely relevant for all of us. So let's carry on. So what are we seeing in terms of challenges in the virtual workplace? We would, I think, focus on three big buckets that we see over and over again with our clients. Number one is this notion of focusing more on being busy rather than productive. And so we see productivity drags as a pain point that's often communicated. We are constantly having our clients come to us and talk about the loss of human connection. And finally, what we see is a sense of decreased satisfaction in work in many cases, where calendars are filled with meetings because, of course, you have to catch up with everybody. There's calendar overload, there's little mental white space, and there's this maybe an imbalance towards more work rather than less work, because work is at home so much of the time, and so you never get away from your work. So I'm curious, and what I'd like to invite in the chat at this point is, if you review this list, what pain points are you seeing in your organizations or that you're experiencing yourself? Would love for you to populate the chat with what you're noticing, either from this list or from your own experience that may be different from this. So just take a moment to do that. Let's see what people are experiencing. And if you don't have your chat open, you can just you can open that on the control panel down below. So little calendar white space, poor home-life balance, misconnections, communications issues, Zoom fatigue. Here we are on a Zoom. Hopefully you're not experiencing too much fatigue. Great. It looks like this is familiar to all of you. And please offer anything that you see that's not on that you're experiencing that's not on the list as well. But it seems like this list is resonating. So when we reflect on the list, we think about, well, what are the consequences of these pain points? What are we seeing in our own experience? What are we seeing in the media? And I think that there are three things that really stand out that tie back to these challenges. So one is, that's probably been the most widely reported phenomenon, is the Great Resignation, where seemingly a whole generation of mid-career professionals have decided to move on from their work, maybe reimagine their work, change where they work, change where they live. But the Great Resignation has garnered a lot of attention for very good reasons. I think more recently we've seen this phenomenon, or are hearing about this phenomenon of quiet quitting, where people may be remaining in their jobs, but they are mentally checked out or mentally disengaged, relatively speaking, to where they were formerly. And then finally, I think broadly speaking, we hear a lot about toxic workplaces, which takes a lot of different forms, but I think that the primary form that I would note that it takes is a sense of a deterioration of company culture or team cohesiveness. And this leads to miscommunication, to all sorts of behaviors that are not really healthy cultural behaviors that have had a severely negative impact on a variety of company cultures. So I think the bottom line here that we've all discovered since March of 2020 is that we can't just simulate or translate what we did pre-pandemic, pre-virtual, pre-hybrid. We can't just translate that back into our virtual or hybrid environments. And so I'm sure that all of you here have participated at one level or another in a variety of virtual convenings that are simulations of what it was like to be together in quote unquote real life. Coffees, lunches, the virtual happy hour obviously had its moment in the sun for a period of time in 2020, especially. And I think that what we've seen is that people have actually dialed back from these substitutions or simulations of what real life is like. And we've seen that because they haven't really worked. They haven't worked to the degree that I think that we all would have hoped that they would work, that they would restore a sense of human connection and so on. And so what we see, I think, continually when we ask people about what their experience is, we ask our clients what their experience is in virtual and hybrid settings. There's this constant desire for human connection, a sense of belonging, a sense of presentness with our colleagues. And that I think we also see an incredible appetite for intentional apprenticeship, mentoring, and coaching. And we've seen a decline, I think, in those kinds of investments in organizations because everything has become so performance and execution driven as a result of needing to get things done, but not having the time and space necessarily together in the same space to spend time in these other areas. And so I think that what we see, leaders, executives, HR professionals, people leaders of various kinds, where they're trying to put their investments now is and asking themselves questions. They're asking themselves, how do they create loyalty? How do they create stickiness? How do they address some of the challenges we talked about earlier? And especially, how do they create a sense of non-transactional care for people? And I think it was great to hear what Melissa offered in terms of Cooleaf's strategies and approaches to this. Cooleaf is addressing these kinds of problems, these kinds of challenges head on, and I think that that's one of the things that makes it such an appealing partner for many organizations and companies. So what do we do about this problem? And I think that our answer to that, our experience from our client work, our client experience, is that it's actually calls upon us to double down on trust and to recognize that building trust really is a core driver of team performance. And so we have to get creative about how we build trust in virtual and hybrid environments. We can't build trust exactly the same ways that we did before when we were embodied together in the same space and time as one another. And so when we think about building trust and the value of trust, we actually use a framework that we call the 3C framework for conceptualizing this. And I think that this is a pretty simple framework, but it's also I think a really powerful one. And so what I would just like to do to orient you to this slide is to see that the vertical axis on the slide is trust and the horizontal axis on the slide is impact. So if you think about the slide in quadrants, the upper right-hand quadrant, if this were a 2x2, for instance, the upper right-hand quadrant is where you want to be, where trust is maximized and impact is maximized. And so when we think about the 3C framework, what's our first C? It's communication. And so we see well-performing organizations almost always have very strong communication cultures. And that the communication takes a number of forms. It takes a top-down, cascading down communication form where the top executive or the top business unit leader is making their vision and their priorities really clear to the organization, and that gets cascaded down through leadership team and managers, et cetera. And there's also a bottom-up function of that where there's a kind of a feedback loop back up through the managers and the leadership team, back up to the top leader. And there's also great communication across and through teams. And so that is, in a sense, a precondition for driving trust and driving impact. The next C in this framework is coordination. And so coordination is a next level effort to drive trust, to drive impact. And coordination is where everybody is working and moving well together, where roles and responsibilities, systems, and processes are really, really clearly articulated, and everybody knows where everybody else is, and nobody's stepping on anybody's toes. But you're able to dance together really elegantly and gracefully, and be very well organized as a team or an organization. And then finally, the highest performing level for teams and organizations is when those teams and organizations are collaborative. And so collaboration requires the best thinking of everybody, and decisions about how to take the best thinking forward in a variety of ways. It encompasses the best of coordination and communication. So all the benefits you get from coordination and communication, you get in collaboration, but the whole is greater than the sum of its parts in a way that's different. So there's a kind of a multiplier effect that occurs in highly collaborative environments. In order to have highly collaborative environments, though, you need to have high degrees of trust. And that is a precondition for getting the impact and the performance that you and we are all seeking in our organizations. So how do we think about trust? Well, we think it's important for all organizations to have, in some sense, a belief about trust, a definition of trust, or a framework for trust. And the framework for trust that we use at Kenny & Associates is, in some sense, a classic trust framework that is used by many professional services firms, especially to think about client relationships. And the way that we're going to talk about the trust equation today is adapted from a classic book in the field, an absolutely wonderful book for those of you who are working in professional services environments, The Trusted Advisor, which many of you are probably familiar with. Now, we have adapted the trust equation for working outside of professional services environments. And we've thought about, how do you not only take this to work as an advisor to organizations, but how do you use this framework in a way that can be valuable for organizations? And so taking it out of a professional services frame and putting it more into a team and organization frame, which is what you're going to see shortly. And so what I'd like to do with the framework, I don't want to create framework overload for you today, but I do want to walk through the framework. I want to try to illustrate for you very simply one way of using the framework that we think is quite useful. And then I want to bring the framework to life and tie it back to the 4 trust building strategies that we're going to underscore today. So we believe that trust in this framework can be assessed as an equation. And the equation has 3 numerator elements, the 3 elements above the line. In this case, that's credibility, reliability, and relatability. We call these colloquially the 3 abilities of trust. And these 3 abilities of trust are the elements of trust that you're trying to maximize, to try to grow these, grow the impact, the positive impact of these elements as much as possible. And the denominator element of trust, that is the element of trust that actually undermines or even destroys trust if it's very severe, is self-orientation. The more self-oriented we are in our relationships with our colleagues, with our teammates, with our partners, with our clients, the more self-oriented we are, generally speaking, the lower the trust in the relationship. So we want to think about maximizing these numerator elements, credibility, reliability, relatability, and minimizing the denominator element of self-orientation. So let's walk through and just do a quick click through here and talk about each of these elements and define each of these elements so that you understand them a little bit more concretely. So we think of credibility as really being a two-part definition. And the first part of the definition is the degree of authority or expertise that's brought to a relationship. If you think about your professional relationships. All of you, no doubt, are experts in a variety of ways in your fields or your domains of knowledge. And you bring your experience, your resume, your training, your background, et cetera, to your relationships. And in all of those qualities, you bring a level of expertise that gives people confidence in you. But credibility is not just expertise. It's also the degree of integrity that you bring to a relationship. That is, are you trustworthy? Can somebody believe what you say because it's honest, because it's credible, because it's believable? And so to be fully credible, you have to be maximizing both of these elements of credibility: authority, expertise, and integrity. Reliability is really just the degree of follow-through that you bring to a relationship. And we usually think about these in terms of time and quality. Sometimes you can think about this also in terms of money, in terms of budget and so on, meeting a budget. But it's essentially the degree to which you do what you say you're going to do and the time that you're going to do it with the level of quality or finish that you committed to. So some of you sometimes will have deliverables and they will be first drafts. And so that's the expectation, that you're going to be delivering a first draft by Wednesday at 5. In other cases, you're going to be delivering a finished product by Friday at 3. And so did you follow through to the degree that you committed to? And can the person who is going to be the recipient of that deliverable, or who's going to be your partner in meeting with you and collaborating with you, can they count on you to show up on time? And can they count on you to do the things that you say you're going to do? The third numerator element is relatability. And relatability is different from credibility and reliability in that this is really a reciprocal element. And this depends on the quality of the relationships that you're able to cultivate, and relies on the degree to which you're able to share yourself with your colleagues, your collaborators, your team members, et cetera, and the degree to which you can solicit successfully from them who they are. And so what matters here are things like, what's your biography? What's your family life like? What are your values? What are your priorities? What do you care about? What makes you you? What do you stand for? Learning these things about your colleagues, but also finding a way to share this about yourself with your colleagues is what relatability is all about. In the book, The Trusted Advisor, this term is called intimacy. And I'm going to call it, in a post-Me Too world, intimacy is a funny word to be using in professional settings. And so we found that it's a bit of a barrier sometimes when we talk about this framework. So we have substituted the word intimacy, which has a lot of really powerful and rich meanings, but we think that it creates a little bit more of a barrier than we would like to see. And then self-orientation. So self-orientation is the degree to which you organize around your own perspective or preferences versus those that you work with. So if you are somebody who insists on meeting in the mornings because you're a morning person and you're going to make everybody in your organization join you in the mornings to work, or if you prefer to always be on Zoom and never meet in person, or never do a phone call because you want to see people in video and you won't negotiate that, those would be examples of being self-oriented. And the degree to which you are self-oriented is going to determine, in large measure, how much trust is extended to you by your colleagues. The more self-oriented you are, the less trust. And self-orientation is really powerful. It's the most powerful of the 4 elements of trust, because as the denominator, it divides up the numerator elements. And so if you have a high self-orientation number, you really can undermine all the good things that you're doing in terms of credibility, reliability, and relatability. So we like to provide guidance to our clients about how to use the trust equation in ways that compel a self-assessment of how much trust they may have in particular relationships or on teams, or if you want to think about this at a scaled level, even in organizations. And so to do that, we just suggest that you assign a value of 1 to 5 to each of the numerator elements, with 5 being the strongest number that you could assign to each of those elements. So the maximum value you could have at the numerator level is 15. And for self-orientation, to also assign a value of 1 to 5, but with 1 being the strongest number, because you want to obviously have the smallest number possible for self-orientation. So if you thought about this in an ideal way, you could have a trust quotient of 15 theoretically with individuals or teams or organizations. That would be extraordinary if you accomplished that, but that would mean that you had 5s on all of the numerator elements and a 1 on self-orientation. Most of us don't have 15s in our relationships. Most of us have something south of 15, but it's an aspiration. So how might we think about illustrating this, with a specific example? So what I want you to imagine is that I have a colleague in Kenning Associates marketing function, and she's named Kavita. And what I need to do is to think about the trust that Kavita has in me. So this is what we would call a perspective taking exercise. When we do a self-assessment, we're actually of trust, we're actually trying to imagine, or you can also confirm this in a variety of ways, what Kavita's level of trust in me is. And so I'm just going to do a set of reflection exercises and think about each of these elements relative to Kavita and relative to my professional relationship with Kavita. So let's start with credibility. So when I think about, call it the last 6 months of my work with Kavita, I have shown up with a lot of integrity. There's never been a moment where I haven't told Kavita the truth, or I haven't been honest or straightforward with her. But Kavita has been disappointed in my level of knowledge or expertise about marketing. Even though I'm not a marketing expert, she would like me to spend some more time getting familiar with the marketing discipline and the marketing function. And that's not something that I've gotten around to yet. And so I'm going to give myself a 3 for credibility. I've brought a lot of expertise in my domain of knowledge, and I've brought a lot of integrity to bear, but I haven't connected that with Kavita's domain of knowledge, and that's undermined her sense of trust. Reliability. So the last 6 months, I've missed 2 deadlines with Kavita. And so Kavita might be saying to herself, hey, is Daryl going to be on time with the next deliverable that we have to do together? So having missed a couple of deadlines or been late on a couple of deadlines, I'll give myself a 3. And then finally, in terms of relatability, I don't know Kavita that well. We have a very pleasant relationship. We get along very well. We like each other, but I don't know a lot about Kavita, and Kavita doesn't know a lot about me. And so although we look forward to working together, we enjoy each other, we don't know a lot about each other. So the relatability that I have with Kavita, I give myself a 2. And then finally, for the reason that I've already articulated, I haven't learned a lot about marketing, which is something that Kavita's asked me to do. And I haven't been able to dedicate time to that yet. So I've been maybe a little bit more self-oriented than I would like to be, and then Kavita would like me to be, relative to that request. And so otherwise we get along great, we collaborate great, but I haven't responded to her feedback yet. So I give myself a 2 in terms of self-orientation. So when I evaluate my trust quotient with Kavita, I give myself a 4. So there's lots of headroom for me to move, because as we said earlier, the ideal number that you could have is 15. I've got 4, so I've got some work to do with Kavita. And probably where I can get the most done is by investing in marketing, because if I can bring that self-orientation number to 1, I actually double my trust quotient with her. So let's talk about now bringing to life the trust equation and our 4 trust building strategies together. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to walk through with you a trust building strategy that's tied in a significant way to each of the 4 elements of the trust equation. Now, these strategies, they touch on multiple elements of the trust equation, all 4 of them, but we're gonna propose that they tie especially to a major element of each of the trust equation definitions. And what I want to just again emphasize is that we're trying to grow or maximize the numerator elements of trust. So grow credibility, reliability, and relatability, and reduce or minimize self-orientation. So let's talk about credibility first. So one of the ways that managers and leaders can demonstrate their expertise and also their integrity relative to their colleagues is to provide feedback to them, which I think everybody would say, oh yes, everybody provides feedback. But we're going to argue that feedback in this instance for maximizing credibility should be written feedback. It should be asynchronous, that is, after the fact, but it should be looking to try to leverage the concepts of primacy and latency. And all of you are familiar with primacy and latency, at least anecdotally, in the sense that we almost always best remember the first and last parts of an experience. And so when we talk about primacy and feedback, what we recommend to our clients and what we see our clients doing with the most efficacy is providing same-day written feedback on some experience. That could be a presentation, it could be a meeting, it could be a problem-solving session, it could be on some deliverable. And it's much more specific feedback than anything that would sound like great job or, that was a wonderful meeting. Those are fine things to say, those are fine kinds of affirmations, but they're not specific and they're not written. And we think that it is so powerful for the feedback to be written because it provides a durable, permanent artifact of the feedback and something that you can dig in on subsequently rather than flyby comments. We also think that there's a very powerful latency approach to this, which is to see managers and leaders focus on Fridays in particular, thinking about the classic weekend, have the last thing that they do on Fridays, send direct, specific, concrete feedback on something that happened earlier in the week, something that made an impression on them, something that they want to highlight, and send that feedback as the last thing that their team member is going to see before they sign off for the weekend. And doing that is extremely energizing and inspirational and provides a lift into the weekend. And we think it provides a halo effect into the following Monday as well. And this is something that we've seen a number of our clients incorporate into their practice with great results in terms of the morale of the team and the impact that it has on individuals and the group. And so what we see here is that the manager or leader is really showing up as a caring expert, not just an expert, but a caring expert. And what we see the impact being is, the recipient of this feedback wanting more of it, and so investing more in that strong, in seeking after strong performance. Now let's move to reliability. So this is particularly relevant for those of you who are operating in hybrid environments. I think that one of the most important pain points that we see, one of the most demoralizing things that we see is when organizations and teams are working in hybrid environments and people come into the office for a specific purpose or a specific meeting, or to see their teammates when they're expecting them to be there. And for whatever reason, plans change and they show up and the people that they're expecting to see or hoping to see are not there. That's really debilitating. And it actually obviously drives down the incentive or the motivation to go into the office at all, because if you can't count on who's going to be there, why bother? So what we're really focused on here is calendar coordination, making sure that there is a strategy, an approach to creating visibility for everybody's calendar, especially people who are working closely together, where you're driving home the importance of predictability and consistency. And what this does in terms of the benefit is it just significantly reduces complexity and it significantly reduces waste in team performance. And it also diminishes the need to execute much more difficult, much higher levels of difficulty for hybrid meetings where some people are in the office and some people are working remotely. Hybrid meetings are inevitable. We're always going to have them. But if you can have everybody either all virtual or either all in the office, that's preferable in terms of complexity, at least, to having a mixed meeting setting. As somebody who facilitates hybrid meetings quite a lot in my client work, I know that it's much more difficult and there are many more steps that I have to attend to when that occurs. So this diminishes that level of complexity. Now let's talk about relatability. So again, one of the pain points that we talked about earlier and the things that people are looking for in this new world that we're operating in is a sense of development, of coaching, of mentorship, and so on. And we also see that all meetings that are planned seem to overwhelmingly focus on performance and execution, on getting things done. What we see is managers and leaders spending a lot more of their energy and expressing a lot of anxiety about getting things done because they're operating in this kind of new environment. And as a result of that, there's less coaching, there's less development, there's less explicit mentorship. And a strategy that we really like as an alternative to this is to alternate one-on-ones so that, let's call it, if you have a one-on-one with a team member each week, is 1 week focused exclusively on performance and execution and what we would call the management function, and on a subsequent week focus on development. So that's more on coaching, learning, providing guidance and mentoring and so on, about someone's career or about someone's overall performance, overall work, rather than something that's quite specific. And so it doesn't mean that you can't talk about performance there, but you're doing it much more in a developmental frame. And I think that we see two huge benefits from this that are really powerful. One is just the strengthening of the relationship, of the human connection between managers and team members. And then secondarily, it just takes the pressure off of performance reviews. If you think about performance reviews, typically for many organizations happening every 6 months or so, semi-annual review, annual review, there's so much weight that gets built up in those performance review processes. And this just takes some of the air out of that, takes some of the anxiety out of that by having regular coaching and development conversations. And then finally, let's talk about self-orientation and minimizing self-orientation. And here we're going to connect back to something that is going to look familiar in terms of the reliability strategy. And that is, if everybody is always working virtually, at home or in a cafe, et cetera, and there isn't a regular coming together to have that human connection, we think that that's actually not healthy. It's not something that probably yields top team performance. And so we would argue, and we see it again with our clients, that taking a team first mindset while at the same time honoring the desire to work on an individual basis and to work from home, to work, very flexibly. We want to try to find a balance here, but the team first mindset brings teams together and organizations and business units together on a regular cadence for extended in-person time together. That's more than just a meeting. That is about building the human connection, that is about being able to do ideation and creative work without the pressure of a meeting schedule in quite the same way. And when we think about this at the organization or business unit level, it's probably realistic to think that you could do that on a quarterly or semi-annual basis. But for teams, for smaller groups of people that are more nimble and more flexible, we recommend a monthly cadence for that. And I think that when that happens, we see the benefits is that this creates a kind of predictable, what we like to think of as an accordion style experience. If you think about kind of pressing the sides of the accordion in, pressing the air out of the accordion and bringing people together for a dedicated meeting or event, and then afterwards sending people back out and expanding the accordion, sending people back out to their individual settings. And that, again, that consistency, that predictability is really powerful, but it is also about thinking as a team, as an organization, rather than as an individual, and getting the human connection and the time together that is enormously valuable and that humans crave. So just a quick summary of what we've covered today, and which I hope we'll be exfoliating and exploring more in the Q&A session. It's just going to be important, we believe, for everybody to understand that this virtual trend is likely permanent and that you have to figure out how to adapt it for your organization's culture. And at the same time, although things are changing, one thing that we believe is staying the same is that trust, the importance of trust is even more important than ever, but we have to do deliberate, intentional things to build trust. And it probably needs to be designed in a different way from the way it was designed in a in-person environment. And we've offered these 4 specific strategies for building trust that we've experimented with and that we would encourage you all to experiment with, and again, to adapt to the different environments that you work in. And at this point, I'd just like to thank you for your attention. And of course, if you have any questions or anything that you want to follow up with, you can reach me at that email address. And you can also learn more about Kenning Associates at that URL. And at this point, I'll hand it back to Melissa, who will be moderating our Q&A.
Thank you so much, Daryl. That was really helpful, really insightful. I really love how you kind of broke down those different components of trust for us. Really, really interesting. But before we kind of dive into the Q&A section, I just wanted to share a free resource from the Cooleaf team that I hope will be helpful. If you have a virtual or a hybrid team, and you're trying to think about things for the end of the year that you might want to do, we have a really unique program of virtual activities for the holidays. So I'm going to just post that out in the chat, that link, if you're interested in checking out that resource. We'll also send out that link afterward in our follow-up email. And then we also have the SHRM activity code. So thank you for sticking around to the end. Here is the SHRM activity code. I also will paste that in the chat. You can take a screenshot if you want, but again, we'll be sending out the email to everyone on this call, so you guys can also access that afterward. Great, so we can go ahead and dive into the Q&A. We only have a few minutes left, but we'll try to get to a couple of questions and maybe go a minute or two over. If people want to stay on and have some time, feel free. So the first actually, before we go into questions, I'm sorry, one more thing. Just wanted to call out that we have a post-webinar survey that after the webinar today, if you have a minute, you'll be redirected as soon as you close the webinar, and would love to just get your feedback on this. That'd be really helpful. So now let's dive into the Q&A. So we had a couple questions that we wanted to chat through with Daryl. The first one being about how to maintain culture in a remote environment, which I know you hit on a little bit, but I'd love to just know what are some examples, because I know you've worked with a lot of different companies, Daryl. What are some good examples you've seen of companies building a good culture when they're moving and transitioning into hybrid or virtual work?
Yeah, well, I think that the place that I would start is that when you make a move that's so dramatic and such a change from where you've been, you're probably not going to maintain the culture. You're going to change it, and you're going to need to adapt, and you're going to need to figure out what parts of the culture that we had do we want to keep. What are the healthy parts of the culture that are really intrinsic to who we are, and what's the new culture that we want to build together? And so I think that we work with a lot of just examples that come to mind here are. We work with a lot of creative organizations that, and specifically gaming organizations that historically have spent time working together side by side, ideating, creating together in real time, in real space. And so what we've seen them do, and this is something that really lends itself, I think, to virtual life, and also fits well their business model and their product model, is that they end up playing builds of games together, and they can do that remotely in a way that is very authentic to the culture that they know and that they care about. But before, they would have done that side by side, and they have been able to simulate the experience of gaming virtually. And what's been particularly powerful for them is that it has simulated for them what it's like for their customers and their players to be playing those games as well. So that's where form and content have really come together, and has also allowed them to be doing that in some cases globally. So, we work with one game studio that is based in Stockholm as well as in Redmond, Washington, 9 hours apart. And they often had never done gaming together because of the physical separation. But the 9-hour time difference hasn't stopped them from actually building much more of a shared experience. And, again, using if you want to call it the excuse of the pandemic, to close that 9-hour physical distance. They can't change the time difference, but it's actually brought them much closer together. And so, again, we've seen, I think, a tightening of that culture, where before they may have had a harder time figuring out how to unite an American and a Swedish model.
Yeah, that's really interesting. It's interesting to think about some of the benefits of this new model that people maybe overlook, but there's definitely been a lot of benefits as well as challenges.
Absolutely.
So we are at time, but we are going to do one more question before saying goodbye. And if you guys have other questions, feel free to reach out to Daryl or to Cooleaf. We'll send out the follow-up email with all of those details and include Daryl's contact info as well. So the last question for today is going to be, you went through some really great practices for leading a remote team for new team leaders. I particularly loved the guidance around one-on-ones, which can be challenging to facilitate. But what are some other best practices that you maybe didn't mention today, Daryl, just for a brand new team leader who's trying to lead for the first time 100% remotely or hybrid?
Yeah. Well, I think it is even more important for first-time team leader working remotely to invest in getting to know their colleagues. I think that would have happened much more organically in the past by sitting side by side with one another, by going to lunch, by going to get coffee or drinks after work. In the absence of that, it's important to invest time in really knowing each other. And so I think that we've seen both on a one-on-one basis as well as on a team basis, having experiences early on when you're kicking off a team to really do what we would think of as a team learning experience together, and not just focused on work, but focused on the people and who they are, what their values are, who they again what they stand for, how to get the best out of them. Because getting that great baseline understanding also ties with recognizing when team members may be demoralized, or they may be feeling the blues, or even experiencing some kind of mental illness challenge. Is getting a really good baseline of where your team is early on pays dividends for the duration of the team. And it really it grows the team trust quotient really significantly.
Thank you. Yeah, I absolutely agree with that. Building those connections is so important. So thank you. I think that is all we have time for today. But if you guys have questions, feel free to reach out to Cooleaf or to Daryl. We'll share that info, and the recording will be shared via email. So thank you all for joining us. We hope you enjoyed this webinar. And thanks so much, Daryl. This was really informative, and I loved all of the tips you shared. So we'll definitely be putting those into practice at Cooleaf as well.
Well, everyone at Kenning Associates extends thanks to Cooleaf, and thank you, Melissa, and your team for doing such a great job.
Thank you. Have a good afternoon, everyone. Bye.